The howling wind nearly swallowed Vanessa Lancaster's scream as her horse bolted, leaving her stranded in the gathering darkness of the Colorado wilderness. The sudden spring storm had caught her unaware, miles from town, with night approaching and the temperature plummeting faster than the barometer. Rain mixed with sleet pelted her face, stinging her eyes as she stumbled forward, her sodden skirts weighing her down like anchors. She had left her family's homestead hours ago, intent on reaching Silver Creek before nightfall, but the storm had rolled in with the swiftness and fury of God's own wrath. Zachary Reeves pulled his hat lower against the driving rain, cursing his own stubbornness. He should have made camp hours ago when the sky first darkened to the color of a fresh bruise. Now his horse, Midnight, trudged wearily through the muddy terrain, both of them soaked to the bone. The cattle drive could wait another day, no use getting himself killed over a few $100s. He was about to turn toward a cluster of rocks that might provide some shelter when he heard a cry so faint he almost mistook it for the wind's mournful song. He reined Midnight to a halt, listening intently. There it came again, unmistakably human this time. A woman's voice, high and desperate. "Hello," he called out, his voice barely carrying through the storm's fury. "Anyone out there?" Lightning split the sky, briefly illuminating the landscape. In that flash, Zach caught sight of a figure stumbling through the mud about 50 yards ahead, arms wrapped around herself in a futile attempt to ward off the cold. "Hold on," he shouted, spurring Midnight forward. The horse protested but obeyed, picking his way carefully through the treacherous ground. Vanessa heard the approaching hoofbeats and turned, nearly collapsing with relief at the sight of the rider materializing through the curtain of rain. Her lips were blue with cold, her teeth chattering so violently she could barely form words. Thank God," she managed as the stranger dismounted. "My horse bolted." Zach took in her condition with a single glance. She was minutes away from collapse. Without hesitation, he shrugged out of his heavy oilskin coat and wrapped it around her trembling shoulders. "Name's Zachary Reeves," he said, steadying her with strong hands. "Most folks call me Zach. We need to get you someplace dry. There's an old trapper's cabin about a half-mile from here if I've got my bearings right." Vanessa Lancaster," she replied, her voice barely audible above the storm. "I was trying to reach Silver Creek." "You're about 5 miles off course, Miss Lancaster," Zach said, helping her toward Midnight. "This storm's not letting up anytime soon. Silver Creek will have to wait until morning." With gentle efficiency, he hoisted her onto his horse, then swung up behind her. Vanessa was too cold and exhausted to protest the impropriety of their position. She leaned back against his solid warmth, grateful for the strong arm that held her securely as they set off through the deluge. The trapper's cabin appeared just as Vanessa feared she might faint from cold and exhaustion. It was little more than a one-room shack, but its sturdy walls and roof promised shelter from the elements. Zach dismounted first, then lifted her down with hands that were surprisingly gentle for their size and strength. "Wait here while I check inside," he instructed, drawing his revolver. The precaution wasn't excessive. Abandoned cabins in these parts could house anything from bears to outlaws. Finding the cabin empty save for dust and cobwebs, Zach returned for Vanessa, supporting her weight as she stumbled across the threshold. He sat her on a rickety chair, the only furniture besides a crude table and a rope bed frame with a moldy straw mattress. "You're safe now, Miss Lancaster," he said, his deep voice oddly comforting in the gloom. "Let me tend to my horse, then I'll get a fire going." Vanessa nodded numbly, too cold to speak. She watched through half-closed eyes as he stepped back into the storm, returning minutes later with his saddlebags and a bundle of relatively dry kindling from beneath a fallen log. His movements were quick and practiced as he built a fire in the stone hearth, coaxing flames from seemingly impossible dampness. As warmth gradually filled the small space, Vanessa began to thaw enough to take stock of her situation and her rescuer. Zachary Reeves was tall, broad-shouldered, with a face weathered by sun and wind. His eyes, when they caught the firelight, were the deep blue of a mountain lake. A scar ran along his jawline, partially hidden by several days' growth of beard. His clothes marked him as a working cowboy, worn denim, scuffed boots, and a battered hat that now hung from a peg by the door. "Thank you," she said when she could finally speak without her teeth chattering. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along." Zach nodded, his expression unreadable as he rummaged through his saddlebags. "Hungry?" he asked, producing some jerky and hardtack. "It's not much, but it'll keep your strength up." "Famished," she admitted, accepting the simple fare gratefully. As they ate in silence, Vanessa realized just how compromising their situation was. A proper young woman from Boston, alone in a cabin with a strange man, it would be a scandal if anyone discovered them. Yet the alternative was freezing to death in the Colorado wilderness. "I should explain," she said suddenly, feeling the need to fill the silence. "I came west 6 months ago to live with my uncle after my parents died. He has a homestead about 10 miles east of here. I was delivering medicines to Silver Creek. There's influenza in town." Zach's expression softened slightly. "That's a brave thing to do, riding out alone. My cousin was supposed to accompany me, but he took ill himself this morning." She twisted her hands in her lap. "I thought I could manage the journey before the storm hit." "Weather changes fast in these mountains," Zach said, his tone matter-of-fact rather than judgmental. "Even lifelong residents get caught sometimes." The fire crackled between them, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, the storm continued its assault, wind howling around the eaves of the cabin like a pack of hungry wolves. "You should try to sleep," Zach said after a while, nodding toward the bed. "I'll keep watch." Vanessa hesitated, glancing dubiously at the moldy mattress. Reading her thoughts, Zach reached for his bedroll. "Here," he said, unrolling it over the dubious surface. "It's clean at least." "What about you?" she asked. "I'll be fine by the fire," he replied, his tone brooking no argument. Too exhausted to protest further, Vanessa curled up on the bedroll, still wrapped in Zach's coat. Despite her circumstances, sleep claimed her almost immediately, the steady presence of her rescuer keeping fear at bay. Zach watched her for a long moment, struck by the peaceful transformation sleep brought to her features. In the firelight, her damp golden hair formed a halo around her face. She couldn't be more than 22 or 23, he guessed about his own age, though he felt decades older sometimes. The year was 1876, and at 26, Zachary Reeves had already lived several lifetimes' worth of experiences. He'd fought in the closing years of the Civil War as little more than a boy, drifted west afterward like so many other restless souls, and spent the last 8 years working cattle from Texas to Montana. He'd seen men die over cards, women, and cattle sometimes for no reason at all. He'd buried friends and shot enemies, but he'd never before felt the strange protectiveness that now washed over him as he watched this city-bred woman sleep in the wilderness. Morning arrived with surprising gentleness, sunlight filtering through cracks in the cabin walls. The storm had blown itself out during the night, leaving behind a landscape washed clean. Vanessa woke to the smell of coffee brewing over a rekindled fire. "Good morning," Zach said, pouring the steaming liquid into a tin cup. "How are you feeling?" Vanessa sat up, running a hand through her tangled hair. "Better, thank you. Did you sleep at all?" He shrugged noncommittally, which she took as a no. "The storm's passed. Once we've had some breakfast, I can take you into Silver Creek." "I'm afraid my medicines were in my saddlebags," she said with dismay. "Dr. Wilson will be waiting for them." "We might find your horse," Zach suggested. "Animals often seek shelter during storms." They set out an hour later, Vanessa once again riding behind Zach on midnight. The morning was crisp and clear, the sky a brilliant blue that seemed to mock yesterday's violence. Spring flowers had already begun pushing through the mud, undaunted by the storm's fury. "There," Zach said suddenly, pointing to a cluster of aspens. "That your mount." Vanessa followed his gesture, her heart leaping at the sight of her chestnut mare grazing peacefully among the trees, saddlebags still attached. "Penny. Oh, thank goodness." With both horses recovered, they made better time towards Silver Creek. As they rode, Vanessa found herself studying Zach's profile, wondering about the life that had brought him to this moment. He wasn't like the rough cowboys who occasionally visited Silver Creek with their loud voices and crude manners. There was something quieter about him, something that hinted at depths beneath the weathered exterior. "Have you been a cowboy long?" she asked, breaking the companionable silence that had fallen between them. "Since the war ended," he replied without turning. "Seemed like the thing to do at the time," You fought in the war. The question slipped out before she could consider its potential for stirring painful memories. Zach was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. Union cavalry, he finally said. Enlisted at 17, saw the end at Appomattox, didn't much feel like going back to Illinois afterward. Vanessa absorbed this information, understanding better the gravity she sensed in him. My father was a doctor in Boston, she offered in return. He treated soldiers from both sides. He always said the war took more than just lives. Zach glanced back at her, surprised by her insight. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was, she said softly. The influenza took both my parents last winter. I had nowhere else to go but west to Uncle Henry's homestead. I'm sorry, Zach said, and she knew he meant it. Silver Creek appeared on the horizon just before noon, a collection of wooden buildings straddling the creek that gave the settlement its name. As they rode down the main street, Vanessa became acutely aware of the curious glances thrown their way. A young woman arriving with a strange cowboy was bound to set tongues wagging. The doctor's office is there, she said, pointing to a whitewashed building with a sign proclaiming J. Wilson, M.D., Doctor. Wilson himself emerged as they dismounted, his lined face breaking into a relieved smile at the sight of Vanessa. Miss Lancaster, we were about to send a search party. Henry's been beside himself with worry. I got caught in the storm, Vanessa explained, sliding from Midnight's back. Mr. Reeves found me and helped me to shelter. The doctor's shrewd eyes assessed Zach, who stood slightly apart, hat in hand. Then we're all indebted to you, Mr. Reeves. That storm was a killer. Zach nodded acknowledgement, just happened to be in the right place. He turned to Vanessa, extending his hand formally. Miss Lancaster, I'll take my leave now, glad you're safe. Vanessa felt an unexpected pang at his words. You're leaving already, got cattle waiting, he said simply. They don't drive themselves. Before she could formulate a response, the door to the doctor's office burst open again, revealing a middle-aged man with a wild-eyed expression. Vanessa, he cried, rushing forward to embrace her. Thank God, when you didn't arrive last night. I'm fine, Uncle Henry, she assured him, returning his embrace. Mr. Reeves found me in the storm and brought me to safety. Henry Lancaster turned to Zach, gratitude written across his weathered features. Sir, I don't know how to thank you. Vanessa is all the family I have left. No thanks necessary, Zach replied, increasingly uncomfortable with the attention. He replaced his hat, touching the brim in a gesture of farewell. Miss Lancaster, Dr. Wilson, Mr. Lancaster, good day to you all. Without another word, he swung onto Midnight's back and rode away, leaving Vanessa staring after him with a curious emptiness in her chest. Come inside, dear, Dr. Wilson urged, breaking into her thoughts. You must be exhausted and we need those medicines urgently. The next few hours passed in a blur as Vanessa helped distribute medicines to the town's sick residents. The influenza outbreak wasn't as severe as feared, but several children and elderly residents were dangerously ill. By evening, she was swaying on her feet with fatigue. That's enough for today, Dr. Wilson declared, steering her toward a chair. Henry, take your niece home before she collapses. The ride back to the Lancaster homestead was silent, Vanessa too tired even for conversation. Her thoughts kept returning to Zachary Reeves and the strange intimacy they'd shared in that cabin. She'd probably never see him again. She realized just another chance encounter in the vastness of the frontier. 3 weeks later, Vanessa was gathering eggs in the henhouse when she heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Visitors were rare at the Lancaster homestead, especially on a Wednesday morning. Shading her eyes against the bright May sunshine, she peered down the dusty track that served as their road. A familiar silhouette materialized through the heat, Hayes broad-shouldered, straight-backed on a black horse. Her heart gave a peculiar lurch. Uncle Henry. She called toward the barn where her uncle was mending harnesses. We have a visitor, Henry emerged, squinting toward the approaching rider. Well, I'll be damned, he muttered. It's that cowboy who saved you. Zachary Reeves looked different in the full light of day cleaner. For one thing, his dark hair trimmed and his face freshly shaved save for a neat mustache. He'd traded his trail-worn clothes for a clean shirt and less battered denim. Only his eyes remained unchanged, that same deep blue that had caught the firelight in the cabin. Mr. Reeves, Vanessa said as he dismounted, suddenly conscious of her work dress and the wisps of hair escaping her braid. "What brings you this way, Miss Lancaster?" he replied, hat in hand. "I was passing through and thought I'd check that you'd suffered no ill effects from your adventure." It was a flimsy excuse, and they both knew it. Silver Creek and the Lancaster homestead were nowhere near any established cattle trail. "Very thoughtful of you," Henry said, stepping forward to shake Zach's hand. "Won't you stay for dinner? Least we can do." Something like relief flashed across Zach's face. "Much obliged, sir." Dinner was a simple affair: roast chicken, potatoes, and early spring vegetables from Vanessa's garden, but Zach ate as if it were a feast, complimenting her cooking with quiet sincerity. Afterward, Henry invited him to look at a troublesome plow horse, leaving Vanessa to clear the table alone with her thoughts. Why had he really come? The question circled in her mind as she washed dishes, surely not just to check on her welfare after 3 weeks. And yet, there was nothing presumptuous in his manner, nothing to suggest ulterior motives. When the men returned, Henry was explaining their situation with surprising candor. "Just the two of us since my boy Jacob took sick. Vanessa's been a godsend, but there's more work than we can manage. Been thinking of selling up, heading to Denver maybe. The homestead's been in our family for 15 years, Uncle," Vanessa reminded him gently. "Father would want us to keep trying." Henry sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Your father didn't have to watch his son die of pneumonia or struggle with a bad back and too many acres." An uncomfortable silence fell, broken eventually by Zach's measured voice. "Mr. Lancaster, I've been looking to put down roots somewhere, been drifting long enough." He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "I've saved a fair bit from 8 years of cattle drives. If you're interested in taking on a partner instead of selling outright, I'd be willing to discuss terms." Henry stared at him in astonishment. "You want to buy into our hardscrabble farm? Why, man, there's better land to be had." Zach's eyes flickered briefly to Vanessa before returning to Henry. "Good water source, decent grazing, not too isolated, not too close to town, seems ideal to me." It was perfectly logical, and yet Vanessa sensed there was more to it than practical considerations. A warmth spread through her chest at the thought. "Well," Henry said slowly, "that's an idea worth discussing, surely. You know anything about farming, Mr. Reeves?" "Grew up on a farm in Illinois," Zach replied, "and I've learned a fair bit about cattle since then. Between your experience and my labor, we might make a go of it." By nightfall, the outlines of an agreement had been sketched. Zach would purchase a quarter interest in the homestead initially, with the option to increase his share over time. He would move into the small cabin that had once housed farmhands back when the Lancasters could afford to hire help. "It's settled then," Henry said, offering his hand. "You can move your things in tomorrow if that suits." "I travel light," Zach said with the ghost of a smile. "Won't take but an hour." After Henry retired for the night, Vanessa accompanied Zach to the porch where Midnight stood patiently tethered. The moon was rising, silvering the landscape and casting long shadows from the cottonwoods that lined the creek. "Was this your plan all along?" she asked quietly. "When you rode in today," Zach considered the question, his profile strong against the night sky. "Not exactly," he admitted. "I just knew I wanted to see you again. The rest happened. You barely know me," Vanessa pointed out, though her heart quickened at his words. "I know enough," he replied simply. "I know you're brave enough to ride alone through dangerous country to deliver medicine. I know you're kind enough to worry about a stranger's comfort even when you were half frozen yourself. I know you love your family enough to leave everything familiar behind to care for them." His perception startled her. "And that's enough to make you change your entire life." Zach turned to face her fully, his expression solemn in the moonlight. "Miss Lancaster, Vanessa, I've spent 8 years drifting, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. Maybe it's time to see what grows if I stay in one place." The way he looked at her made it clear that she was a significant part of what he hoped might grow. Not a declaration of love, they were both too practical for that, but an acknowledgement of possibility. "I should warn you," she said, trying to lighten the moment, "farming is harder than driving cattle." His smile transformed his face, erasing years of hardship. "I'm counting on it." The following weeks brought dramatic changes to the Lancaster homestead. Zach moved into the old hand's cabin, but spent most daylight hours working alongside Henry in the fields. His strong back and tireless energy accomplished in days what would have taken Henry and Vanessa weeks. Fences were mended, the barn roof repaired, and the spring planting completed ahead of schedule. Vanessa found herself watching him when he wasn't looking, the careful precision of his movements, the quiet competence with which he approached each task. Unlike many men she'd known, Zach never felt the need to fill silence with empty talk. When he did speak, his words carried weight. June arrived with unseasonable heat, the kind that shimmered above the fields and turned the creek to a lazy trickle. Vanessa took to bringing water to the men mid-morning, a brief respite from their labor. "Much obliged," Zach said one particularly scorching day, accepting the dipper she offered. Water trickled down his chin as he drank deeply, and Vanessa found herself transfixed by the movement of his throat. He caught her watching and held her gaze for a moment longer than propriety allowed. Henry, oblivious to the exchange, was complaining about the heat. "If this keeps up, we'll lose half the corn crop." "Could rig up an irrigation system from the creek," Zach suggested, breaking eye contact with Vanessa. "Saw something similar in California once." The mention of California reminded Vanessa how little she truly knew about Zach's past. 8 years of drifting had taken him to places she could scarcely imagine. What had he seen? What had he done? Who had he loved? The last question caught her by surprise, a sharp pang of something that might have been jealousy. That evening after supper, while Henry dozed in his chair, Vanessa found Zach on the porch, whittling a piece of wood with skilled hands. "What are you making?" she asked, settling onto the step beside him. He held up the half-formed carving. "Chess piece, a knight." "Thought I might make a set eventually." "I didn't know you played chess." "Learned from an old Frenchman in New Orleans," he said. "Spent a winter there after the war before heading west." "You've been everywhere," Vanessa observed, drawing her knees up to her chest. "New Orleans, California." "Where else?" Zach's hand stilled on the carving. "Texas mostly, Montana, Wyoming territory, few places I'd rather not remember." Something in his tone stopped her from pressing further. Instead, she asked, "Do you ever miss it? The traveling, I mean." He considered the question, his knife resuming its careful work. "Sometimes I miss the open sky, camping under the stars, but not the loneliness." He glanced at her. "What about you? Do you miss Boston?" "I miss certain things," she admitted. "Libraries, concerts, paved streets." She smiled ruefully. "Hot baths whenever I want them. No regrets about coming west." Vanessa thought about her life before the stifling propriety, the predetermined path for a young woman of her station. Marriage to someone suitable, children, a life bounded by drawing rooms and garden parties. "No," she said finally. "No regrets." Zach's eyes held hers, and for a moment Vanessa thought he might reach for her hand. Instead, he returned to his carving, but something had changed in the quality of silence between them, a shared understanding, unspoken but real. The drought broke in early July with a thunderstorm that rivaled the one that had brought them together. Vanessa stood at the kitchen window, watching lightning split the sky and remembering the terror of being lost in such fury. Now safe within solid walls, she found the storm's violence beautiful rather than frightening. A knock at the back door startled her. She opened it to find Zach, drenched despite the short distance from his cabin. "Everything all right?" she asked, stepping back to let him in. "Roof's leaking," he explained, water dripping from his hair onto the kitchen floor. "Thought I'd wait it out here if that's acceptable." "Of course," Vanessa said, fetching a towel. "Here, dry off before you catch your death." He accepted the towel with a nod of thanks, running it over his face and hair. The domesticity of the moment struck Vanessa, this strong, capable man standing in her kitchen, water pooling at his feet, accepting her care. "Reminds me of the night we met," he said, echoing her thoughts. "Though our positions are reversed," she pointed out, "this time you're the one seeking shelter." A smile touched his lips. "And you're the one offering warmth." The word hung between them, charged with meaning. Vanessa became acutely aware of their solitude. Henry had gone to bed hours ago, and of Zach's physical presence. The kitchen suddenly seemed much smaller. "I should check that the windows are secured," she said, breaking the moment. Zach nodded, understanding her retreat. "I'll build up the fire." They moved around each other with careful distance, attending to practical tasks while the storm raged outside. Eventually, they settled on opposite sides of the hearth, the crackling fire the only sound besides the rain pounding on the roof. "Tell me about your family," Vanessa said, partly to fill the silence, partly because she genuinely wanted to know. Zach stared into the flames. "Not much to tell. Father died at Gettysburg. Mother followed a year later. Heart just gave out, I reckon. No siblings." "I'm sorry," Vanessa said softly. He shrugged. "Long time ago now. What about yours? Besides your uncle and cousin, I mean." "My mother was Uncle Henry's sister," she explained. "She was a school teacher before she married. My father's practice was quite successful in Boston. We lived comfortably. I had a younger brother, William, but he died of scarlet fever when he was 6. I was 10. "That's hard," Zach said, and she knew he understood the particular pain of watching a sibling die. The conversation flowed more easily after that, moving from family histories to favorite books. She was surprised to learn he was fond of Dickens, to childhood aspirations. Zach confessed he'd once dreamed of becoming a ship's captain. "Never even seen the ocean," he admitted with a self-deprecating smile. "Just like the idea of it." "You still could," Vanessa pointed out. "See the ocean, I mean." "Maybe someday," he agreed, though they both knew the likelihood of a Colorado farmer making such a journey was slim. The storm eventually passed, leaving behind a gentle patter of rain. The fire had burned low, casting the room in a warm, intimate glow. Vanessa knew she should suggest Zach return to his cabin now that the worst was over, but she found herself reluctant to end the evening. "I should go," he said finally, as if reading her thoughts. "Dawn comes early." Vanessa nodded, rising with him. At the door he paused, turning back to her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" "For shelter, for conversation." His eyes held hers. "For warmth." Before she could respond, he was gone, a shadow moving through the rain-washed night. The crops flourished after the rain, and the rest of July passed in a blur of activity. Zach's irrigation system saved the corn, and the vegetable garden yielded more than enough to see them through the coming winter. For the first time since Jacob's death, Henry spoke optimistically about the future. "We could expand," he said one evening as they sat on the porch after supper. "Maybe add some dairy cows, sell butter and cheese in town." "Good market for it," Zach agreed. "Might consider sheep too. Wool fetches a decent price." Vanessa listened to their planning with a sense of contentment. The homestead was becoming prosperous again, largely thanks to Zach's labor and ideas. More than that, there was a feeling of permanence to their arrangement that gave her hope for the future, her future, specifically, with the quiet cowboy who had become essential to their lives. August brought the county fair, an event Henry insisted they all attend. "First time in 3 years we've had something worth showing," he declared, loading their wagon with prize vegetables and jars of Vanessa's preserves. Silver Creek was transformed for the occasion, bunting and banners decorating the main street. Farmers and ranchers from miles around had gathered to compete, socialize, and perhaps find marriage prospects for their offspring. Vanessa, in her best dress, a blue cotton that brought out her eyes, was aware of the speculative glances cast her way by young men and their mothers alike. "Miss Lancaster," Dr. Wilson hailed her as they passed his booth. "Just the person I wanted to see, Mrs. Palmer's baby is due any day, and I could use an extra pair of hands if you're willing." "Of course," Vanessa agreed readily. She had assisted the doctor several times since the influenza outbreak, discovering she had her father's steady nerves and aptitude for medicine. "Good girl, doctor." Wilson said approvingly, "Stop by tomorrow and I'll show you what to expect." He turned to Zach, who stood a respectful distance behind Vanessa. "Mr. Reeves, how's farm life treating you? Quite a change from the cattle trails, I imagine." "A welcome one," Zach replied, his eyes briefly meeting Vanessa's. The doctor glanced between them with shrewd assessment. "Well, don't let me keep you from the festivities. I hear there's a shooting contest starting soon. Might be right up your alley, Reeves." Zach shook his head. "Think I'll stick to the agricultural competitions." As they moved on, Vanessa realized how little she knew about Zach's skills with a gun. He wore a revolver when they traveled to town. Most men did, but she'd never seen him draw it. One more piece of his past remained a mystery. The day progressed pleasantly. Henry's corn took second prize and Vanessa's blackberry preserves won a blue ribbon. They ate dinner on the grass, watching a fiddler competition that had the crowd stomping and clapping. Care to dance? Zach asked unexpectedly as the music shifted to a lively reel and couples began forming sets on an improvised dance floor. Vanessa hesitated only briefly before nodding. I'd like that. His hand was warm and calloused as it took hers, leading her into the whirling circle of dancers. Zach moved with surprising grace for such a powerfully built man, guiding her through the steps with confidence. The touch of his hand at her waist, the brush of his shoulder against hers as they turned each contact, sent a shiver of awareness through her. You dance well, she said as they circled each other. Had some practice in dance halls from San Antonio to Dodge City, he replied, a hint of mischief in his eyes. The music ended too soon, leaving them slightly breathless and standing closer than propriety strictly allowed. Zach stepped back first, offering his arm to escort her from the dance floor. The moment was interrupted by a commotion near the beer tent. A burly man with a red face was shouting, jabbing his finger at another man's chest. The second man, tall and thin with a drooping mustache, had his hand hovering near his holster. Trouble, Zach muttered, steering Vanessa away from the confrontation, too late. The shouting escalated and suddenly the thin man drew his pistol. Before he could aim, however, another figure intervened, the town marshal, pushing through the crowd with his own weapon drawn. Put it down, Fletcher, the marshal commanded. No gunplay at the fair, Fletcher hesitated, his eyes wild with drink and anger. For a tense moment, it seemed he might turn his weapon on the marshal. Then, abruptly, he lowered the gun. He cheated me, Fletcher slurred, pointing at the burly man. Marked cards, I swear it. Take it up tomorrow when you're sober, the marshal replied, confiscating Fletcher's pistol. For now, you're spending the night in jail to cool off. As the marshal led Fletcher away, Vanessa became aware that Zach had positioned himself between her and the potential danger, one hand resting on his own holster. The instinctive protectiveness touched her deeply. Perhaps we should head home, she suggested, suddenly weary of the crowd. Henry agreed, having witnessed the altercation. Last thing we need is to get caught in someone else's quarrel. The ride home was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. Vanessa found herself watching Zach's profile as he drove the wagon, wondering again about the life he'd led before arriving at their homestead. Had he faced such confrontations often? Had he ever been the man with his hand on his gun, anger clouding his judgment? She couldn't imagine it. Despite his size and evident strength, Zach had never shown anything but controlled composure, even when frustrated by a broken plow or stubborn livestock. They arrived home as twilight deepened into night, the first stars appearing in a sky still painted with the last colors of sunset. Henry, complaining of a sore back from the long day, retired immediately. Vanessa lingered on the porch, reluctant to end the day. Zach paused at the steps, looking up at her. You should be proud, he said. Blue ribbon's no small accomplishment. It's just preserves, she demurred. It's more than that, he insisted. It's making something lasting from something fleeting. Not everyone has that gift. The sentiment surprised her, revealing a poetic streak she hadn't suspected. Thank you for the dance, she said, changing the subject slightly. It's been a long time since I had the opportunity. My pleasure, he replied, and she could tell he meant it. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the chirp of crickets and the distant hoot of an owl. Vanessa knew she should bid him good night and go inside, but something held her in place, a sense that words needed to be spoken, boundaries crossed. Zach, she began, uncertain where her courage was leading her. Why did you really come back? After the storm, I mean, why seek us out? He considered her question with characteristic thoroughness, as if weighing each possible answer. Because I couldn't stop thinking about you, he said finally. Because after 8 years of drifting, you were the first person who made me want to stay somewhere. The simple honesty of his answer took her breath away. I'm glad you stayed, she whispered. Zach took a step closer, near enough now that she could see the faint scar along his jawline in the porch's shadows. Vanessa, he said, her name a question and an answer both. She knew what he was asking: permission, confirmation, reassurance. In response, she reached out, her fingers lightly touching his cheek where the scar marked his skin. It was all the invitation he needed. With gentle deliberation, he closed the distance between them, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that began tentatively but quickly deepened as she responded. His hands came up to frame her face, thumbs brushing her cheekbones with a tenderness that made her heart ache. When they finally parted, Vanessa kept her eyes closed for a moment, savoring the sensation. When she opened them, Zach was watching her with an expression of wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe what had just happened. "I should go," he said reluctantly, though he made no move to leave. "Yes," she agreed, equally reluctant. Instead of departing, he kissed her again, more briefly this time but with no less feeling. "Good night, Vanessa," he murmured against her lips. "Good night, Zach," she replied, finally stepping back. She watched him walk toward his cabin, his stride purposeful even in the growing darkness. Only when he disappeared inside did she turn to enter the house, her fingers touching her lips where the warmth of his kiss lingered. The following day, Vanessa found it difficult to concentrate on her chores, her mind repeatedly drifting to the previous night's encounter. She was hanging laundry when Henry approached, his expression uncharacteristically serious. "Need to talk to you, girl," he said without preamble. "About Reeves?" Vanessa's heart skipped a beat. Had Henry seen them last night? "What about him?" she asked, striving for casualness. "I'm not blind, you know," her uncle said gruffly. "Seen how you two look at each other when you think no one's watching?" Heat rose in Vanessa's cheeks. "Uncle Henry," he held up a hand. "Let me finish. Reeves is a good man, hardworking, honest. Don't know much about his past, but I know a solid character when I see one." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "If he's spoken to you or means to speak to you about intentions, you have my blessing." Relief and gratitude washed over her. "Thank you," she said simply. Henry nodded, clearly uncomfortable with the emotional moment. "Just wanted that clear. Now I'm heading to check the north fence line, won't be back till supper." As he walked away, Vanessa realized he was deliberately giving her and Zach time alone, a tacit acknowledgement of their growing relationship and his approval of it. She found Zach in the barn, repairing a broken harness with the same careful precision he brought to all tasks. He looked up as she entered, a smile warming his features. "Henry's gone to check the fences," she said without preamble. "He won't be back until evening." Zach set aside the harness, wiping his hands on a rag. "Is that so?" he asked, his tone neutral though his eyes had darkened. "He also mentioned that he approves of your character," Vanessa continued, moving closer. "And that he would give his blessing if you had intentions toward me." Zach's expression grew serious. "And what about you? What would you say to such intentions?" Vanessa's heart pounded in her chest. "I would say that I've never met anyone like you, Zachary Reeves. That you've brought life back to this farm and to me. That I find myself thinking of you at all hours, wondering what you're doing, hoping to catch sight of you." The confession hung in the air between them. Zach crossed the space separating them in 2 long strides, his hands coming to rest on her waist. "I love you, Vanessa," he said, the words simple but profound. "Have almost since that first night in the cabin. I don't have much to offer, just my hands, my heart, and whatever future we can build together." "It's more than enough," she whispered, rising on tiptoe to meet his kiss. This time there was no hesitation, no holding back. His arms encircled her completely, drawing her against the solid warmth of his chest. Vanessa wound her arms around his neck, surrendering to the sensation of being held by someone who cherished her. When they finally separated, both breathless, Zach rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said, the words somewhere between a question and a plea. "Yes," Vanessa answered without hesitation. "Yes, I'll marry you." They were wed 2 weeks later in Silver Creek's small church, with Henry beaming proudly and Dr. Wilson serving as witness. Vanessa wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved and brought west in her trunk. Zach, looking almost uncomfortable in a new suit, couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked down the aisle. The ceremony was brief, the celebration afterward modest but joyful. When they returned to the homestead that evening now, their homestead, Vanessa felt a curious mixture of nervousness and rightness. This man, this place, this life, all of it felt destined somehow, as if the storm that had nearly claimed her life had instead delivered her to exactly where she belonged. Zach must have sensed her thoughts, for he took her hand as they stood on the porch of what was now their home. "No regrets?" he asked softly. Vanessa shook her head, squeezing his hand. "None whatsoever." With gentle decisiveness, he scooped her into his arms, carrying her across the threshold as tradition demanded. Inside, he set her carefully on her feet but kept his arms around her waist. "Welcome home, Mrs. Reeves," he murmured, bending to kiss her with a tenderness that made her eyes sting with sudden tears. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "My cowboy who heard my cry in the storm." His smile was for her alone, intimate and full of promise. "And found my own warmth," he completed the thought, drawing her closer as night fell around their home, sheltering them together against whatever storms might come. 5 years later, Vanessa stood on the porch of the expanded Lancaster Reeves homestead, watching as Zach taught their 3-year-old son, William, to ride his first pony. Henry sat nearby in a rocking chair, his arthritis too advanced now for farm work, but his mind still sharp as he called out advice. The homestead had prospered beyond any of their expectations. The irrigation system Zach had designed now watered twice the original acreage. A small herd of dairy cows provided milk for Vanessa's cheese-making operation, which had become known throughout the county. They'd built a proper barn, expanded the house, and hired 2 hands to help with the increasing workload. Vanessa's hand rested on her swollen belly, feeling the movements of their second child, a daughter, she was certain, though Zach insisted he didn't care as long as mother and baby were healthy. "Not too fast, William," she called as the pony picked up pace. "Hold the reins like Papa showed you." Zach's steadying hand never left the pony's bridle, his other resting protectively on his son's back. The sight of them together, dark heads bent in concentration, identical expressions of determination on their faces, never failed to fill Vanessa's heart with gratitude. Dr. Wilson had been right about her aptitude for medicine. She now served as his assistant 3 days a week, helping deliver most of the county's babies and tending to injuries and illnesses when the doctor was occupied elsewhere. The arrangement allowed her to maintain her family responsibilities while using her talents to serve the community. "Mama, look," William called excitedly as the pony completed a circuit of the yard. "I'm riding." "I see, darling," she called back, smiling at her son's pride. "You're doing wonderfully." Zach looked up, catching her eye across the yard. The love in his gaze was as strong as it had been on their wedding day, tempered now by shared experiences, the birth of their son, the lean winter when they'd feared losing the farm, the joyous expansion of their family with this new child soon to arrive. That night, after William was asleep and Henry had retired to his room, they sat together on the porch swing Zach had built the previous summer. The evening was mild, stars appearing one by one in the deepening blue of the sky. Vanessa leaned against her husband's solid strength, his arm around her shoulders, his hand occasionally rubbing gentle circles on her belly where their daughter grew. "Happy?" he asked, a question he still posed regularly, as if to reassure himself that he was providing the life she deserved. "Completely," she affirmed, tilting her face up for his kiss. "Are you?" Zach's answer was to draw her closer, his lips warm against hers. "More than I ever thought possible," he murmured. "You gave me a home, Vanessa, a place to belong. We gave each other a home," she corrected gently. "That night in the storm, you saved more than my life. You saved my future, our future." In the distance, thunder rumbled, another spring storm approaching. But this time, they faced it together, sheltered in the warmth of the home and family they had built. The cry in the storm long since transformed into a song of love that would sustain them through all seasons.